All right, welcome in to the Bobby Carpenter Show. So we are pressing forward here. Ohio State players getting ready to ramp back up this week. And so the question becomes, what's going on? What do they got going on this summer? We got some NIL news that we got to talk about. And, these coaches are seeming to now voice their opinions a little more. Not that they're necessarily against NIL, but Brian Kelly had some comments that we'll dive into this week that I think Joshua, he's probably speaking for a lot of coaches that are out there. As always, we're going to dive into some questions from our listeners as well. We got Schlegs coming up. How about that? A nice big one from Schlegs. But Josh, we're going to start out with there's this debate in the going around NBA, NFL, and oh goodness, who started it on the NBA side? Austin Rivers, about how they could get 30 guys to go play from the NBA and the NFL right now. And then obviously some NFL guys clap back saying, hey, you know what? You could easily find 30 guys in the NFL to go play in the NBA. Where do you come down on this debate, and where do you think it ultimately ends up?
Man, listen, I watch the NBA every single night now with the postseason going on. I think the premise is true. Like, it's based off of factual assumptions, right? Like, I'm watching Chet Holmgren the other night catch a ball, turn around, make a three at the end of a quarter. This is a dude who's over 7 foot tall. He should not have that type of coordination, that type of balance. Shouldn't be that athletic, but he does it. Right, like we see, Anthony Edwards, who's revealed himself to the world, and SGA, and all these guys. And so, like, the premise that you could take 30 NBA players and they could play in the NFL, I get, because the athletic profile translates. The other way around is a little bit tougher. Like, where do you put an offensive tackle? Where do you put a defensive tackle? I'm getting here though. I'm getting here.
Right.
The reason why this is a bad take is a lot of these dudes ended up playing basketball because they went through two-a-days and couldn't cut it. They did Oklahoma drill for the first time and it didn't feel very good. There's no load management when it comes to football. You got to play. I watched dudes sit out for 6 weeks because they got a bone bruise. And last time I had a bone bruise, they said, well, there's nothing we could really do in terms of rehab. It's mostly pain management. So let's get you on a pain management plan and get you back out there on the field. And that's the difference here. There's a heart and a spirit that comes to being a football player that you can't teach. You can't measure in athleticism. And so that's the difference maker for me.
Yeah. I'm glad that you went there because that was it for me. There are a lot of guys in the NBA that are athletic enough to play in the NFL, but they chose basketball, and not because, I would say it's physically easier from an athletic standpoint, but it is less physically demanding of your body. There's a requisite toughness you talked about, Joshua, that I think a lot of guys don't enjoy. And to share a story with Charles Barkley, I got a chance to sit down with him. Did I tell you this before?
I don't think so.
Okay. So I got a chance to talk to Charles Barkley. It was before the Houston Final Four, not this last one, 2 times ago, like 7 years ago. We're having dinner with him before he's calling the game. Romo is getting ready to get into commentating. He knows him. So it's us, and Jason Williams is there as well. We're talking about it, and Charles Barkley's, man, I don't know how you guys do it. And by the way, Charles is like the same dude off air as he is on air, so it's unbelievable. Like, he just curses a little bit more, but all his takes, I mean, that is authentically who he is. And this is how I know it. Charles Barkley, you would have to say, is probably one of the tougher guys to ever play in the NBA.
Yeah.
I mean, my man threw a dude through a glass window at a restaurant. Like, he's not backing down from anybody. And he tells this story. He was like, I tried to play football, man. I went there. We had practice. It's like, it's hot, getting water at the end. The coach is telling us, great job. And I'm thinking, we're good. We're done. And then he's like, hey, I'll see you back out here in 2 hours. He said, I'll see you at home. I'm not coming back. He goes, you're about to tell me about to do all that over again? He goes, you guys are foolish. And that's the difference, I think, between you look at football and basketball, where there's nothing that ever existed like that. In basketball, you have 2-a-days and stuff, but the physicality, the demand, the fact, like you said, you're playing through pain. It's just a function of, like, is it going to get worse? That's what you always ask the doctor. Can it get worse? If it can't, can you play? Well, let's just see what we can do.
Well, Chuck was interesting too, because he went on TNT and was like, I'm going to jump myself into this debate. He said it. He's like, we couldn't do it. He's like, I don't know why we keep trying to do this, but it's a different sport. Like, it's not for us. I remember my rookie year, the first game I ever played in, it might have been the first kickoff. I'm running down. And you know how they teach you, okay, you got to have your head on a swivel. So if you get a single block, you got to be able to either bullet or you got to stick and go around it. If you got the double team coming at you, we'd like for you to take on the guy who's the post and then try to split through it. And then if you get to that wedge, boy, you better stick and rip and try to split through. You telling me I got to run full speed in between 300+ pound men? And that was my assignment. My first game, I got down there. I'm looking at the wedge. Boom, boom, get through it, whatever. The hoops dudes, see that? 300-pound dudes coming your way? No, sir. They are tapping out.
Yeah. The full speed running into another human being, like of excess 250 pounds, excess 17 miles an hour from each side. Like it doesn't matter what type of pads you have on. And it's funny that you said that. I got I used to always, try to split guys in college, like set them up or whatever, try to split them. And one of the guys in the NFL goes, these dudes, you ain't gonna be able to split them. He goes, you get in your gap, but pick one of them to lean into. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, because 300 is a lot easier than 600. He's like, so you want to try to make sure that you're taking one instead of letting those guys get shoulder to shoulder and just hammer you. He's like, because it's going to feel terrible. And that is the difference. And there's guys out there, you see, Myles Garrett, T. Higgins, like you see these guys, most guys in the NFL that played anything I would say outside of an interior line position, like you were saying, but even there were some offensive tackles that were really good. Orlando Pace, I watched him, play some highlights of him playing basketball. He won a state championship out of Sandusky. Dude's 300 pounds running down the field, dunking on cats. Like you have guys, Myles Garrett, like I said, I mean, there's these guys who are tall, athletic. I mean, I played with Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson, I think, is the closest thing I've ever seen to LeBron James in my life. So there are guys I think that can transition, do over, and do that. It's crossover. It's just a function of Joshua. Kid, they developed the skill, and that's just really a matter of time and dedication.
That was my biggest thing. It's like, they're like, oh, well, Steph Curry's 6'4", so you put him out there and, that's a big X wide receiver. It's like, okay, I get that. It's like, I also know that CJ Stroud, he can shoot the ball. I watched Malik Hooker, who was a legitimate basketball recruit out of high school. I've watched him shoot the ball. Like if he spent a little bit less time working on his football skills and spent more time, shooting like Steph Curry did growing up, who's to say that these guys can't develop a skill to where it's like, okay, we know he's a bona fide shooter. So I'm here. Like I understand where this comes from, but we are telling a lie to ourselves. It is intellectually dishonest to not include the big picture of how we get football players and how we get hoopers.
And I would even concede that on average, basketball players are probably the most athletic people on the planet. When you talk about like the size, the agility, the leaping, like all those things in aggregate, yes. But there's always that element of toughness, Joshua, that like maybe you don't have quite the athleticism for most football players, but there's that element of toughness that's tough to recreate. So with that, we'll dive into one of the toughest guys I know, terrible basketball player, but really tough. He was just at the strength coaches convention. Anthony Schlegs is going to tell us some stories about what was going on down there and maybe some of his hoop dreams all coming up next. Welcome back into the Bobby Carpenter Show. And now we are welcoming our buddy, Anthony Frederick Schlegel, not a basketball player of sorts, but a pretty strong weightlifter, was down in Dallas, Texas. Where were you at the CSCC? Is that what it was, Schlegs?
CSCCA, yep. Collegiate Strength Conditioning Coaches Association. How about that?
Perfect. What goes on down there? Because this is where all the strength coaches from across college football gather. And what the NFLs or high school, what's going on?
Yeah, Phil Matus was there. He's the head strength coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He just got his master's jacket. I mean, and the CSCCA was actually started in 2000. You have the NSCA, which a lot of people know, and there's a certification through that. This is more pertaining to professionals in our sport of just collegiate strength and conditioning. And there's like a practicum and things that you do to get this certification because they want to see how you coach. Because coaching is more than just studying a book and being able to regurgitate information on a sheet. It's actually how do you project clearly and concisely what it is that you're trying to deliver to the athlete so they have that. But it's a brief conference. This is Maymester, which I love. It's discretionary period. So a lot of people can now attend. That wasn't always the case. But as it's, grown and we have this, what if Vic used to say, it's never mandatory to be great, Joshua. And so you're always training anyways, but at least the guys get to leave the building wherever they are right during this time before they get into summer conditioning. And it's funny about your your comments about football and basketball. And, you know, you can replicate some of the things that you do in a basketball practice, but basketball is such a skill-oriented sport. I mean, the shot of it, right? Like the things that you can work on. My favorite things in the game of basketball is boxing out the gym.
Yeah, that's
you know what I mean?
toughness.
Like that, like get them out the paint, like working on that speed to power, when you're playing on defense. Like I like that side of the basketball, but you can go in and work on your craft for hours at a time. In football, yes, you can do that, but you still have to run, cut, and also hit people. And everybody on the field hits people. Quarterbacks can deliver a blow sometimes, but they get hit, right? So that physical component is something that you necessarily can't, replicate without pads, but you have to train the tissue to be able to handle that type of collision. So all those things go into it, why it's such a special sports, ultimate team game, but just fun. Like my son plays baseball. I work with the Columbus Fury, the volleyball team. And I just get fascinated about strength conditioning and how we can compare, Josh, like you guys were talking about volumes in spring practice and volume in OTAs and guys tissue being ready to handle that type of volume because they haven't been doing it because they've been getting prepared for the combine. But I just started thinking about, man, all the volume, like from throwers and pitchers, especially, like that's just like volume that we have when we're running a skill position, right? Too much of high speed distance is going to hurt a kid over time, right? It's just intensity with volume. They're going to break down. And I started equating to like, okay, I have to start working on the deceleration properties of that throwing motion, but also there's days where you throw and it can be accelerated. There are days when you throw when it's kind of like max velo type days. How do I compare? Like, how do I work those into a training program? Again, whatever. I just like to learn about it, right? So it just gets my wheels turning how I can articulate that to people. Because then I see kids that go out there to these tournaments and they play 4 or 5 days tournaments and all they do is warm up and throw every single time. And no wonder why they get hurt. They don't train. They overdo a skill without training and resting. So there's a fine line between that, but those are all the fun things that you do. And then I also, because this year was in Fort Worth.
Yes, this is what we want to hear about, Schlegs. Give us the
stop off
inside.
for the stomping grounds. I picked up a nice sweet hat
Metroflex.
from Metroflex Gym where I grew up, home of Ronnie Coleman, 8-time Mr. Olympia.
Yeah, buddy.
Branch Warren. So the owner and I, Brian, who's one of my best friends, I was like, Brian, I'm here. He's like, oh my gosh, come on, man. So it was me and a Jordan, another bodybuilder there. He's like a 212 bodybuilder. At the first day we did legs.
What is a 212 bodybuilder? What is that? Like 212?
That's just the weight class that they're in. They're not like the heavyweights like the giants are. I probably did well over 200 or 20,000 pounds of weights on legs that day. And you know what though? My wife's like, why do you do that to yourself? I'm like, listen, man, pain is the indicator of life.
No one wants a Nastasol.
I did something about it, man. Just how I grew. I guess the thing, man, we're also some of our life experiences. That's how I grew up. I grew up training like that. That's why I love it, But
and
most important thing about it, don't want Nastasol. You want to look good. You want to keep it sexy, Been married for 20 years.
Have a saggy butt in your jeans, Schlegs. That looks awful.
Looks terrible, man. I went to Luke Combs. Mother's Day, actually, Saturday night. Well, last night, I don't know, man. I'm taking my wife out to, what's it called? Chris Stapleton, George Strait, and Little Big Town. Like, what are we talking about?
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing.
I saw they were good. I saw George Strait and Chris Stapleton in Nashville. Very good show, Schlegs.
Can't look terrible in jeans out there. You got your quads, got to be filling those things out. Anyways, I digress now. But it was just a great experience. Joshua hit me with something.
Yeah, no, you talked about the way that you grew up, and it was illuminating to me. You used to tell stories about going back and forth to these wrestling tournaments, and you told one story about a sandwich, and you were being particularly picky about the toppings here. And I think it's a really good story for the people at home. They gotta really understand it. Schlegs, can you give me that one again?
It's not necessarily parenting 101. It's not, this is going to lead into a better point because you guys are going to talk about NIL. But I remember I was 11 years old. I was wrestling in this tournament called the Tulsa Nationals. And I finally got like seeded in top 6. And It's a big deal from a kid from Texas going up to Oklahoma, being seeded. And I ended up losing my second match, and I had to wrestle all the way back. And I placed top 6, but still, it was terrible. I probably should have done a little bit better. And I just remember, like, on the way home, I'm driving. I got it's a maroon single cab Chevy Flare side, okay, with like white lettering Chevrolet across the back. And it was a stick shift. I remember it like it was yesterday. So we're driving, and I'm hungry, man. I just wrestled like 9 matches, you know.
Is this
and
before or after, Schlegs, your dad was having to do manual neck?
No, this is after. Manual neck's on the way up there. That's just a CNS primer. Yeah. So anyways, we're driving back. I'm like, hey, I'm hungry. We go to McDonald's, just driving off because we're trying to get back. It's 5.5 hours from Dallas or something like that. And I was like, yeah, I'll take a quarter pounder with cheese, pickles, ketchup only. He's like, I'll take 2 Big Macs, And I'm just like, no, that's not what I want. And then he like finished up the order. And literally, like, in the line, it just like started poking at me in my chest, like, that's why you lost. It's like all you want is these other things, right? Like, how about just focus on the mission and just do it, right? You're worried about like condiments and stuff like that. I'm giving you food. Just eat the damn food, right? Just like when we're up there, like, stop dicking around with other kids. Go out there, get your mind right, and go wrestle. You want to have to wrestle 9 times. That was kind of the point. Now, I'm going to say this too. This is probably
I thought he said somewhere in there that you were soft like your mom as well. Schlegs.
Yeah, he probably put that. He probably put that in there. He probably blamed all the softness on my mother. R.I.P. But I want to put this in there in perspective too. NIL is we learned this in econ, Bob. Like, you're only as valuable as your second best option.
Yep.
Growing up where we didn't have second. I personally did not have a second best option. I either went to school playing football or I paid to go to school or I worked. And now today, it's like the real thing is through the culture of the program, how do you create and instill that second, like, there is no second best option, right? Living where your feet are. And this is another great reason why you go to these conferences, because you can't think of all these things all the time. I had a conversation. I'm just going to, I don't know, I probably digress, but I'm going to give you guys a little nugget. And he was talking, his name is Daryl. Daryl's the strength coach at Troy. He was telling me about one of these like a tat he had, and it was just a dash for his grandfather. We just started talking about what that dash actually means. And there's a lot of dashes that we partake in our lives. My son's going through one right now in high school baseball. They're going through the regional finals here in Florida. And there's a dash to that. It's the 2023, 2024 baseball season, right? There's a dash. The point is, like, as you talk to kids, it's like, how are you going to live out that dash? Because I'll tell you this, man, in 43 years of life, I've lived out a really hard-ass, awesome dash to this point. And I love it. I'm grateful for it. I wouldn't trade anything of it, because all of them have summed up and made me who I am sitting right now. So, like, when you talk to these kids and all the other fluff and all the other white noise, that's everything out there, how can you get them to focus on just that dash, right? And that's the one thing I really enjoyed about the kids that we got, that all came back to Ohio State, and why I think NIL is actually a good thing done the right way is because they get to live out another dash that wasn't necessarily there before because they had maybe other opportunities. And that NIL is just a piece of the pie in that dash. It's not the reason. And that's where people got to press the brakes on what that is. But like that, living in that moment, being on that team, going through that strain with all those guys, regardless of where they are on their journey and their dash, like, those are special moments that you remember for the rest of your lives, something that you can't take for granted. But those are the type of things within a great culture with great people in the building that I 100% authentically believe that you can do at this level that can impact kids, because not all of them are growing pro. More will go pro at Ohio State because it is who it is. But we still got to be able to teach that mindset and that attitude of gratitude for what we get to do, where we do it, and who we do it with. Anyways, that's why you go to those things, man. Professional development.
Absolutely, Schlegs. Buckeyes, we appreciate it. You go have some fun. Josh and I, we're going to dive in to who the bluest of blue bloods are in college football. Might surprise you who's on this list and how these tiers rank out, all coming up next on the show. Welcome back into the Bobby Carpenter Show. Our guy Schlegs just lighting the world on fire. And I saw this cruising around the internet, Joshua. And, for our jobs, like, it's important to be up to date, abreast of what's going on. And I saw this blue blood tiers. I don't know if it was on Instagram or on Twitter that I saw it kind of floating around, and it had essentially like four tiers. It had a 1A and B, a 2, and a 3 of blue bloods. And to me, when you start talking about blue bloods in college football, what does that mean? Well, to me, you have to have a great history, national championships, Heisman trophies, um, NFL draft picks, a lot of award winners, all these things. And you want to have that big history of it, but then you also have to have it going presently as well. You have to connect the history, the past, and the present. And so they had the tiers, and the 1A tier, and I'm going to throw these five teams out to you. And I think one of them helped themselves immensely. We have Alabama, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Michigan, and Ohio State. Do you agree with those five teams being there? Should anyone not be there? Do you think someone should be bumped into it?
Generally, I agree. Notre Dame is always a challenge for me because
That's right.
they are. I mean, right? You can't tell the story of college football without mentioning Notre Dame, right? So you feel like they fit in there. When was the last championship? 1980s? I haven't seen it.
1988
Yeah,
was a long time ago.
wasn't around for it. I was not alive. So it's, the part of the story that I know is like a really good program, but a program that hasn't been able to get over the top there. Oklahoma's another one of those that's kind of interesting to me. And they've been right there on the fringe. So certainly I think you could put them in there. And then Michigan, of course, I think really the last 3 years for them has put them squarely in that conversation. They're the winningest program in college football history. So certainly they've got the history. Now they've got the present day hardware to back it up. So I can't really disagree with the top tier.
It's Michigan, I think like you said, the last 3 years catapulted them back up. They were at risk of kind of sliding out of that, kind of like
Yeah.
what Notre Dame did. Their last championship was what, 97? And so, Charles Woodson obviously winning Heisman Trophy. So you have, those things. Um, Desmond Howard won a Heisman Trophy out in the early 90s, but that last national championship was 97. And so, like, the connectivity of it, like Ohio State, they had 02, you got 14, and, people have kind of besmirched, Ohio State, and they're like, they've had all this talent. And I'm like, yeah, they've won two. They had an undefeated season that you were a part of that they would have played Notre Dame, probably beaten them. They lost to a really good Bama team. Tress played for two more. I'm like, they've been on the cusp. Bama,
Yeah.
obviously, with Saban, he got them back into this. But Notre Dame, I probably would slide them down just
Yeah.
because they've been really good. They've been in the category of really good, but nobody's really calling them elite. So then you've got tier B, which is interesting, like the 1B tier. It's got Miami, USC, Nebraska, and Texas. And I would say that Texas is probably, if Sark has it going, and maybe in 2 years, you could probably flip Notre Dame and Texas. And I think if USC gets it right, because they've had every decade, they seem to have some good teams, Heisman Trophy winners, national championships. Um, Miami has had some spurts, but
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like they've got the body of work or the
Yeah.
consistency. And Nebraska has a lot of Notre Dame to me, where like I think they'll be better, but they just haven't been good in the last 20 years, really.
Yeah, the Miami one, I agree with the spurts, and like when they've been really good, they have been really freaking good, right? And so I think based off of that alone, you could put them in the legacy tier there, but they got some work to do, no doubt. I look at USC, and I agree with you. The history for them would make it really hard to not have them in the legacy tier alone. I think they've been underwhelming, probably past like the mid 2000s. But we'll deal with that. I'm with you when it comes to Texas, and I know Texas is like super polarizing because we ask every year if they're going to be back. And it's been a little while, but they made it back to the CFP. Think things are looking up with Sark. I don't know if I 100% trust Sark yet, but certainly he's a good ball coach. This Nebraska thing is a challenge, though. Like, I mean, they haven't really been good in my whole lifetime. I'm 30 years
Yeah.
old. Like their last championship was the year I was born, I believe, or right around there. Like it's been a while, and they have been bad as of late. Like I remember when I was in high school, like 2010 ish. They had a Big Ten championship appearance. Maybe it was 2011, and they got their doors blown off by Wisconsin. It was like, the worst loss until Wisconsin lost to us in 14. I'm really struggling. I know what the history says about Nebraska, and I know the tradition, been on that campus, but boy, it's a long way from the championship program that we once saw.
So we got tier 3 or tier 2, I guess you will, the fringe blue bloods. Tennessee, Penn State, Florida State, Clemson, Georgia, LSU. Now, LSU, I think they have a title back in the 60s, I wanted to say, maybe 70, somewhere in there, maybe a Heisman Trophy. But I will say this, they've had 3 different coaches win a national championship in the last 20 years, which is pretty darn impressive. So I don't know if you could put them into that legacy group yet. I don't know if the total body of work is there, but their recent history is probably better than anybody in that group.
Yeah, I feel like there almost needs to be like a new blood tier where you could put a team like LSU, who's got a little bit of history, but certainly recently, it's hard to tell the story without them. Georgia's a funny one because obviously the recent run has been really good, but the joke about Georgia was always for like 40 years they could get close, but they really couldn't get there.
Yeah.
And so I get that. Clemson without Dabo is an interesting story to tell. Florida State fans are just like punching air constantly. Like now they get the fringe title to their name. Penn State, man, they are one of the most unique ones because part of me says that you should put them in the legacy category, and the other part of me says, what about championships? Right. Yeah. And so it's like it's a difficult one. And then, I know the history of Tennessee. I'm not going to argue too much. And Tennessee is playing some decent ball right now, too.
Problem is Tennessee, their last national championship 98, I believe.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time. They've had some great players, haven't been there. Penn State, similar thing, haven't had a title, since the 80s before you were, born. Florida State, 93, 99, and they've got 13 in there with
Florida
Jimbo.
State, their thing too is like they were one of those teams that for a long time was always really good but never got over the hump. Like they were super consistent as a program for a while.
Oh, yeah. Well, you go look at the run that they had with Bowden. I want to say he won 11 games, like 10 years in a row. Something.
Yeah, I mean,
ridiculous.
A bunch of top 5 finishes. Yeah, it was ridiculous.
He was really good. And then the last tier here, you got Florida, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Oregon, Auburn, A&M, Boise, and Washington, the elite programs. And it's funny because out of those programs right now, I think Oregon and Washington are the only ones that you would probably consider actually elite. The rest of them have had like spurts here and there, but haven't had the consistency that you would never think. In Florida, while they've been really good and they've got 3 national titles in the last 30 years, but they've really been on hard times here the last 10.
Yeah, no, it's been tough for sure. Michigan State one, like I just, the run that they had when I was in college was really impressive. It was a college football playoff team there. New Year's 6 appearances all over the place. Wisconsin, very similar. New Year's 6 appearances, just never really able to get over that hump. But some of these programs right now, you're kind of looking with the side eye, like, okay, but what about today?
Today. And that's the question. And that's why it's a good little list. I know some Georgia fans will be furious, FSU fans furious. LSU fans probably pretty upset with this, but I think you look at this and you look at criteria and you could build metrics around it. I think they got a lot of things pretty right on that list because in that elite programs, I don't know who else you would really put in there. No. So you start draining out like the top 13, 14 programs of all time. So I think it's a decent list, something to talk about. And as we move forward now, one of those teams, LSU, their head coach Brian Kelly had some interesting things to say about NIL, its intent and where it is now and how they're handling it down there in the Bayou. All coming up next on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Welcome back into the program. And NIL, it's been here for a while, and some schools are adapting better to others. They've got rules and stuff that are coming out, Joshua. There's obviously the NCAA and the House case. There's the Virginia legislation that's happening. And so this thing is an ever-evolving beast that we're just trying to kind of keep our head around. But, I mean, I don't think there's really a debate now that NIL at its original intent has been so bastardized and just twisted and confused into what we call it now. And Brian Kelly, I think, has said what a lot of coaches around college football have been thinking. And Nick Saban has talked about it. He's out of the game. But, whether you're Kirby Smart, whether you're Ryan Day, Jim Harbaugh's gone, you've heard Dabo kind of lament on this. And I have no problem, Joshua. And I know that you don't as well. We're pretty aligned with a lot of this where guys should be able to earn value based upon what they do. But guys coming in and saying, hey, I want $500,000 or $1 million, whatever it is, and school A is going to give me this. If you're not going to, I'll go there instead of here. And Brian Kelly came out and said, we're not in the market of buying players. And unfortunately, right now, that's what some guys are looking for. They want to be bought. He goes on to say, I didn't come down here because we're going to jump into the transfer portal and buy a football team. Is he right?
In a way, yes. Like I understand what he's saying, and I think everybody kind of has their tolerance level for the demands now that are being made. And some of the transfer kids, I think what they're asking for is reasonable in terms of what value they can provide to a team. I think in particular, some of these transfer kids haven't messed up, and high school kids are like that's a crapshoot. But if he had Jaden Daniels sitting there in the transfer portal, like the next one, he's going to win you a Heisman, give you a shot to win a title. He's not saying this same thing. What he is communicating to us is, I am not willing to pay for just a guy, but
Yes.
make no doubt about it, he'd be willing to pay for the right guy. And that's where a lot of these coaches are at. And there was a quote kind of the other side. The head coach at Boise State was saying that his incoming freshmen are not eligible to make name, image, and likeness from the collective as a caveat to that. And I'm totally there for it. If you're a developmental program, you got a 3-star coming in the door asking you, for $25,000, $30,000, $40,000, you're probably laughing at him and saying, brother, this is not how we work. We do not have the finances for that. So go ahead and go somewhere else. And if they give it to you, best of luck. And I think these coaches have really drawn a line about how they perceive value and what value they're willing to pay for. If you're a guy who's going to be, a marginal starter, maybe a depth piece, like, dog, I don't have deep pockets for you. Of course, if you feel like you got the next starting quarterback who's giving you a chance, you're going to pay for it.
Next starting quarterback. And some of these guys coming in, as you know, most guys as freshmen do not start in college football.
No.
And so you're paying for production that's sitting on the sideline. Like, you're not paying for production at all. It's over there. And so you need to get it onto the field. And that's where I think this disconnect happens. If you're a really good player in the transfer portal and not just a guy in there, and sometimes I feel like these players are trying to lean in out of teams' desperation.
Yes.
Joshua, they know that, like, hey, there's teams that need defensive tackles. There's teams that need corners. You need an offensive tackle or whatever it is. So I might not necessarily be worth whatever I'm asking, but I'm the best option in there. And so you've got to give that to me. But the problem is when you do that, you erode some of that culture within your own team where you're paying guys maybe more than they deserve, and they haven't really had that production there. And so this is what the challenge is for all these coaches, is trying to keep this transparent with their players so you don't lose the locker room, which is the hardest thing that can be to manage. And right now, I think it's as hard as ever.
I'm gonna tell you a story right now. So there was a school in the Big Ten who took in a player as a transfer, and the collective was cutting checks, right? And he comes in the spring and is nowhere near as productive as what people thought.
Yeah.
Well, the guy who was supposed to be the guy at this position, it's one of the positions where you play multiple dudes, was like, nah, they haven't bumped up my check, and they don't look like they're willing to bump up my check. And so he hops in the portal and goes somewhere else. And these are the challenges that coaches are trying to balance here. Is like, certainly you bring in a piece and you're anticipating that you're going to get something. If you don't, now all of a sudden the guy that you brought in is making more than the guy that you had right there, who's giving you everything that you asked. That's a bit of a problem. And it's like, when you're 18 to 22, 23 years old, you're a little bit immature, right? Like, those are hard things to handle for young people. And these coaches are figuring that out just the same way we are.
Yeah, it's and that's what I'm saying. You have to be transparent where everybody, because in the NFL, everybody knows what each other is making. And so if you're outplaying a guy who you're making more, that they're eventually probably going to play you, and they're going to move on from that other guy. And hopefully they'll be able to get into some longer term contracts where if you play well, hey, maybe they can keep bumping you up. But it's like, well, I want a school over here is going to pay me an astronomical amount, allegedly. And so you hop in the portal. But I always look at the example of the Travion Henderson at Ohio State. He's the number one running back. One of the best guys in the country. They bring in Quinshon Judkins, who ironically now, Joshua, is on the cover of the NCAA football magazine or football game with about 5 or 6 other guys. Donovan Edwards of Michigan, but kind of being the preeminent piece there. And the only way that that works, I think, is if both of those guys obviously had conversations, communicated, which Ryan Day said they had, but also you have to have an understanding of what the financial situation looks like for both guys.
Right.
So Trey's comfortable with it, Quinshon's comfortable with it, and everybody's like, all right, we're all good. And you can't have guys who are just crazy selfish too. And so when you get guys that come in like, hey, we'll pay you this, and if you play real well, then you get the bump. Then you get like we'll call it the player performance check.
But they're not supposed to do that right now, right? And so that's why we need a different environment where we can actually reward performance. Like when they said name, image, and likeness came about, the one thing that it said is it's not pay for play. This cannot be performance related. And we are seeing an environment right now where all these things are happening. It's just not happening in name. I think if you told players, listen, you get your check bumped up if you give us a certain level of production, I think a lot of people would be happy with that.
Absolutely. So got that. We got a couple. I might dive into one more question on that here because we got tailgate talk coming up next. We're gonna answer all of your questions. A couple about the summer, and there might be one as well about that Judkins on the cover and how that plays in the locker room. We'll get into that coming up next on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Welcome back into the show. Now we got some tailgate talk where we answer your questions. First question coming here from Terry Zones. It said, how often do past players, Joshua, come back to watch, be part of some of the workouts in the summer? And then what are those summer workouts? What are those days? What are those like for the players as they kind of move here from now until really the start of camp?
I mean, if you're Bobby Carpenter, you're there all the time. This is when I met Bobby. It was when I was a current player. He's a former player. And it was really helpful to have former players around because I could say certain things. I could ask certain things to Bobby that I didn't necessarily want to say to Coach Fickle. I haven't been to the Woody in a long time because I live in Chicago right now, and it's one of the things that pains me. I'd love to be back in Columbus so I could be around a little bit more, but make no doubt, you go out there for practice, you see former players around the summer, guys who are currently in the league training, they'll come back for a couple of weeks and, they'll train with their position coach and some of the guys out there. And I think it's one of the huge assets that Ohio State gets to work with that other schools frankly don't. Like some places I've talked to guys, they don't go back. And guys like to come back to Columbus.
Columbus is a great city, so that makes it easier. So guys, I think whenever they're back after OTAs, usually they get back, for like a 3 or 4 week period there, mid-June to mid-July, maybe take a vacation. Like Nate Ebner, John Simon are always back. Who else is coming through? And, you'd see Joe Burrow will even come through and get a workout when he's cruising through Columbus. Paris Johnson was just in and working out when he was back. So those guys are all there. Usually work out in the morning, get some weights a little bit, get some running. Those guys now, man, they go usually 5 or 6 days a week. And sometimes it's like recovery day. They call it a woo-saw, some stretching or whatever that looks like. But now, I mean, it's a full day's work. And then they'll come back and a lot of those guys will do skill development. Some of them have internships that they'll go to. And so they try to pack a lot into those days. And it's really the only time where you can focus wholly on football. Then you will have some class here and there, but it's not near the course load. One final thing, so I want to follow up on this question, Joshua. We're talking about Quinshon Judkins being on the cover. Transfer player running back coming in on the cover of NCAA, the relaunch of the game. You think that causes any issues in the locker room?
Not in that locker room specifically. If it's one thing I know about Travion Henderson, is he is about the most level-headed, down-to-earth, grounded star player outside of like maybe Marv, who we just saw come through. This dude he operates differently. He's a very faithful man. I don't think that he gets caught up in jealousy and how things look and celebrity and things of that nature. So I'm certain if it was talked about and if everybody's on the same page and if everybody's happy with their role going into the season, there's no issue. Like you can get the cover. I've got opportunities to do that down the line.
Absolutely. I think you said it very well. And, we had Lathan Ransom. Some of these guys have talked about how great the locker room is.
Yeah.
Those things are pretty open and discussed. And if anybody's got an issue, I think they discuss it and talk about it,
Yeah.
and get those things handled. So I think you're right on with that. Coming up, we're going to wrap up the show. We got our Tipico sportsbook segment, betting, a little bit of NBA action going on as we dive into that. Coming up next on the Bobby Carpenter Show. All right, welcome back in. The final segment of the program brought to you by Tipico Sportsbook. They're going to change the way you bet with their new Tipico Rewards program. The more you bet, the more you earn, the more you win. Get up to 5% cash back on your bets. Be sure to check out our daily big play boost, giving you the best odds and parlays in Ohio sports. And don't forget to follow along with your favorite big play personalities on social media to lock in your bets with us all week long. Must be 21 years old to gamble. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Started talking about a little NFL NBA to start the show, Joshua. 8 teams left in the NBA playoffs. You got Boston and Cleveland. They're tied 1-1 currently. They got a game here going off soon. New York Knicks and Pacers. Knicks up 2-1. Pacers just stole the last one. OKC and Dallas tied 1-1 right now. Minnesota leading Denver 2-1. If you're going to pick one team to win the finals, who you got right now?
Oh man, that's a toughie. I feel like I want to say Boston because they played, they had the best regular season. I think they've
Well,
been
they're
really
minus
consistent.
350 on Tipico, so they're the
But
odds-on leader in the East.
I know, but here's the thing about Boston, right? And we saw it when they played Cleveland that game too. If they can't shoot, they're cooked. And they
Yeah.
were 0 for 8 in the third quarter from three. They were 2 for 10 in the fourth quarter from three. If they can't shoot, they're cooked. So I like I like I like Minnesota,
They're,
especially the way they're playing right now against the defending champs. It feels like a team that got a little lightning in a bottle.
dude, Anthony is good, man. I
He
mean,
is.
I hadn't watched him really play until the playoffs, and he is ridiculous. Like I haven't
Yeah,
seen somebody who, and he's very humble about it too. Like when you hear him
sure.
talk, because people are trying to say he's the next Jordan, he's like, "Don't be putting that on me." Mike's the greatest. All these
Well, now
things.
you know what the rumor is.
What's the rumor?
The rumor is that it's Jordan's secret son. This is all allegedly, right? Allegedly. I got to
Well,
say
you're in
that for
Chicago.
the
You give
cover
us
and the
the
protection.
information.
Well, no, I mean they do they'll mash their faces up together, half Jordan, half Anthony Edwards, and faces line up, and you see some of the turnaround jump shots. Looks a little bit Jordan-esque, and so the rumor mill is all alleged is saying that it might be another Jordan out there.
Well, that would be wild. That it's all that. No, you know what? Maybe somebody needs to do a DNA scrape on him. When you're walking by, just pluck some hair out of his arm or whatever.
Well, this is the issue with Jordan is like you want to pluck one off the top of his head. Dude's bald. That's
Yeah,
smart.
that's tough. I mean, you get some skin. I don't know. They can figure that thing out. That's the Anthony Edwards. That's an interesting deal because there's I don't know if you ever saw this story. I know we're up against it with Sherman Smith and Desan, the coach. He played at Miami, ended up coaching now. I forget where he's coaching, but he ended up being this coach's child. Guy
Did
played
not
with my
know this.
dad. His dad, he recruited him to Miami and played for him there. And it turned out to be his son that he never knew he had. So maybe that could be the case. Maybe that's
Man.
out there. Who knows? I love Minnesota. I would take Minnesota and Boston right now. I think those are the two easy picks. The Knicks aren't that bad though. I don't necessarily hate them. Jalen Brunson's really good and he's
He
playing
is
well.
good.
The Cavs, man, I wish they had a little more juice to them. I don't know if Mitchell can give you enough, but
We're in a good spot because I thought the Cavs were getting swept. They got their one win. You see, I'm wearing
got
the
it on the
wine right
road
now. We're
too.
good to go. We're
I
good to
thought it would
go.
be game 3. If they can win game 3, they got a chance to maybe put some real heat on the C's. See if they can get that done here. We'll keep you up to date as the week rolls along. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Bobby Carpenter Show.